Welcome back, everybody, to a brand new episode of Cedar Flags. We are back in what is going to be a very long episode for this series standards, which is good for you guys, but kind of bad for me. I'm actually still getting over this cold that I just had, which has delayed this episode way more than I thought it was going to have to. But anyway, we are back and we are doing a lot of detail work around the new ride. In the last episode, we went ahead and built this new building around the station. We gave it that kind of factory industrial theming, and we're actually going to be adding a lot to it this episode. So we're doing a lot of path work, and we're disguising a lot of the stuff around the area and making it more, I guess, guest-friendly moving forward here. I want to mention straight up front here that someone had a really awesome comment in the last episode, and yes, I do usually read almost all of the comments on my videos, so don't act like I don't read you guys' comments. But no, the comment was awesome. It was, this building was pretty cool. It's a great building, but it just doesn't look fun enough to be in a giant amusement park like this. So in this time lapse, we're trying to remedy that a little bit, and we're gonna try to brighten it up a little bit because it is cool. It is a really cool building, but I really agree with what they said. It's not very inviting. It is just basically a factory look, which is not good for trying to get guests on the ride. So we will be brightening that up a little bit. Unfortunately, at some point during this time lapse, I actually had a computer crash and I lost all of the footage that I had. I had an autosave that actually went through at some point, so I didn't lose a lot of the progress in the game, but I did lose almost an hour and a half, probably like an hour 40 worth of video footage, which is a major bummer. I've actually, moving forward here, in my kind of like behind the scenes look for you guys, I'm actually using a hotkey to trigger recordings now in my software. So I've been recording little chunks at a time. So just moving forward, I'm not gonna, if I do have a crash, I'm not gonna lose a massive chunk of recording like I did for this episode. It was just such a big bummer. But I'll point out where we end up losing that footage. And of course, in the live portion at the end of the video, you'll be able to see more in depth of what we did. And I'll go ahead and point out all that stuff for you when we get to that point. But what we've been doing up to this point is basically what a lot of this time lapse is going to be. These little planters that are going around the pathwork over here. So this pathwork is very intense. It's a highly advanced level stuff, I guess, for Planet Coaster. We have a lot of layers and different levels going on here. So we're trying to kind of hide the terrain differences with these planters here. And it ends up looking great. It's just such a tedious task to get all these working correctly. So yes, this was a lot of very, very boring work on my end, but I think the end result here is awesome. So I'll let you guys give me a thumbs up if you think this ends up looking really good in the end, and a thumbs down if you guys don't like it, which I suspect probably, I wouldn't say a lot of people would not like this. This is a really awesome area of the park. I think as we've gone through this area, and I think this is maybe indicative of where I am as like a builder in this game after I've put so many hours into this now. These areas that we're making now are just so nice. They are very detailed, and I think we've over time learned how to use the game in like on one hand, but on the other hand, we're trying to keep the thought of like, how would the guests see this as they walk through the park, and how would like people kind of, how are they going to look at the park? And I think I've always gone through building in this game with that mentality, and I think that's something you really need to do because, as a player of Planet Coaster, you get a top-down view, which, in a sense, you can make a lot of awesome things look, awesome from like an overhead view, but if you get down and you just set yourself down a little bit to what a guest would see, sometimes those changes and those little things that you thought were awesome aren't so awesome. So yeah, it's one of those things that I've always tried to do, is just with like that in mind, just really try to keep the guest perspective in mind here. So what we're doing with a lot of these planters, we're kind of denoting what these areas are. So, that anywhere with some of these planters that we have going on, it ends up being part of this ride. So it's a really good and subtle way to get guests to maybe think like, oh, I want to go on that coaster. And then they look near the coaster and they see all this theming around it. And you can almost follow that theming to find where the entrance to the ride is. And I think that's something that's very, very important. And it is something that I just love about this area that we're doing in this video. But you're seeing a lot of those planters being down. We end up putting some of these shrubs down here. I think I end up changing this. Actually, I know I end up changing those. I just thought they looked very repetitive and it was kind of awkward. But we will get to changing that in a little bit. What we're doing right now, however, is putting down some of these custom supports. Now, this coaster, for the most part, ended up being pretty okay with supports. There were a couple of, I noticed with the inverted coaster in specific here, there were a lot of times where the supports seemed to kind of bunch up into each other a lot. So what we did is eliminate a lot of those, and then there are certain areas, like because of the paths that we have down here, there are certain areas that just don't spawn supports here. So it's unfortunate that you can't really like force supports on, which I think would be a really cool idea. But we just have to work around that by doing some custom support stuff here. And in the end, it looks pretty good. It was kind of a weird challenge for me, because I have very, very little experience doing custom support. So I was just basically trying to mimic what we had already in the area, or on this coaster rather, in terms of supports here. And really, one thing I didn't want to be too shy about here was getting supports on the paths that we have, because this corkscrew over here in specific was kind of in an awkward spot because of the way the paths are. It was pretty much right over the top. So as you can see, one of those supports actually goes straight down onto the path, and we're using these planters to basically give the guests a way to get around it. Now, eventually we're gonna have to go through and put down the barriers around this area so they don't actually walk through these planters, which I kind of wish that these had the barriers built in already, because it would have made my job a lot easier. But it's unfortunate that we had to do that, but it is something that had to be done, and it actually ends up being pretty awesome down here. I love this little planter over here, and I think I had at one point looked up, or I think I follow like Cedar Point on Instagram, and I was just looking at a picture that they posted, and I was like, you know what? I don't think we do a lot of that in Cedar Flags, and that is just having the planters and everything kind of free flowing on top of the paths. And that's something that I want to do moving forward a little bit more, and just not being afraid to go over the pathwork and then just create those artificial boundaries, which is something a little bit more natural than what we would see with the original path system in this game. But what we're doing right now is a little bit of decoration work on the building itself. A few of these little things that I was putting in here just to try to attract some attention over here and to change the narrative of this building almost. You're seeing a lot of more bright colors and some of these little machines that are in there just to draw some like motion. Motion attracts the eye. So trying to get a little bit of motion on this building, trying to make it a little bit more fun. Like that commenter had said, just trying to get this a little bit more playful, a little brighter, and it just ends up being pretty cool. We eventually will go around and do a lot of detailing with some orange trim work around here. The orange, of course, being the color of the ride. So again, it kind of makes sense to the guests where maybe this is the building for that ride. You can see the orange ride and the orange building and put two and two together there. But yeah, this is one of those little steps in trying to get this building a little bit cooler. And I think this is actually maybe right before I had my computer crash, and maybe not. There's a little bit more before, but yeah, there is a lot of trim work that I did on this building to try to get some bright colors in here. And as you can see, we're trying to change the water tower color there. It'd be really cool to be able to put a logo on that water tower, but I don't think we can. There you go. Yeah, that was just about where I lost all my footage. And you see there's like orange trim around the top roofs now. And it's just one of those things where it looks cool now from a distance, and I will definitely show you guys that back in the live portion. Another comment from the last video, somebody had said that the queue for this ride is pretty short, and by game standards, I don't think so, but by like real world standards, I can totally agree. So as you can see, we're actually changing the queue quite a bit here. We're pulling it out of that little garage door that we had down there, which is actually a really cool little thing. And we're spinning that queue all the way under some of these track parts. Really the main, like one of the main parts of this track goes right over this queue now. So this whole thing is really cool. And in the end, this looks awesome. Now, unfortunately, as I was just saying with the ride versus reality, or the game versus reality rather, the game's not gonna necessarily fill up this queue for us. So unfortunately, it's gonna be kind of, you know, we're never gonna see a lot of people walking down here or standing in line. But just imagining yourself down here, like as the ride is going over top of you, it looks awesome. And I can just imagine, like, as an actual guest in this park, it would be really cool. But no, this area is one of those areas that I said was going to be very advanced path placement. As you can see, our main path for the park is up here, and then we have that queue down low. So just those varied heights makes this very, very challenging to try to build around. So this took a lot of just trial and error essentially here. As you can see, I've got the little thin planters that we've been working with for the most part, but these planters also came with a big block section that was on the grid. So we started using some of that. We end up going back and I think changing some of that, but we're just trying to create those differing levels here, and it's pretty successful in the end here. But it was just one of those things that was just, it's such a weird area because the paths are so close together here, and it was just very, very challenging to try to make it look good because we obviously could not have kept the terrain there on their own or on its own. It just would not have looked good. So we're trying to make something, and I just thought these planters would be such a great natural feel over here, and it ends up working. But like I said, there were a few tweaks. Like eventually we're gonna have to edit the lower planter here. We're gonna end up making them the actual like grid-based planters because we get a lot more room to work with on those. But it's just one of those things that I really didn't have a lot of experience with those planters in particular in this game, and that actually stems true to a lot of things. It's one of those things where, like, I feel like in this game I could find a part and learn how to use it, and then I'll end up using it a lot, but I just kind of hesitate trying to use new parts in this game. But this is one of those things that ended up working very well, so obviously I had to learn how to use it, and it really ends up looking pretty awesome. But like I said, the terrain work around here, it's very, very frustrating to work with this sometimes because the terrain is pretty much locked once you get paths on it. So as you could have saw right there, we had a lot of terrain poking through, and it just was not working. So we can't smooth that terrain out at all. We had to cover it up somehow. So just adjusting all these planters was kind of a pain, but in the end, it looks so good that it was just all worth the effort there. This whole thing was just one of those things. It was just a learning curve for me, and I was just trying to use new parts here, and it was just kind of interesting. Eventually, we needed to take that main path down to the level of the queue over there. Now, it's one of those things, like, as we were building this ride, certain things kind of came to light, and we had that other exit for the ride that came out near this area. If you remember that, I'll definitely show you guys that later on and point it out as we start building over there. But we needed a way to kind of get people down here, and this is one of those builds that kind of shaped itself in a way. As I was building through over here, things just kind of started falling in place, and that's one of those things that honestly I remember from like as far back as playing Minecraft, where I would build like a building and just certain blocks would fit certain ways, and then eventually it all came together. So I started, like, you know, trying to sketch some stuff out at first, and then eventually it worked itself out. And that's one of those things that happened here. We had such an ambitious almost project over here, and in the end it just ended up working out in certain ways, and I'm very, very happy with how this turned out. I think this part of the park, like I said earlier, I think this part is just such an advanced, cool area of this park, and it looks like some of the best work we've done in this area, or in this park in general, and it's pretty cool. But no, moving forward here, we got a lot of planter work, like I said. There's a very large support structure that we're gonna have to do at some point as well. There's so much left in this time lapse, it's pretty crazy. But yeah, I guess we could talk a little bit about the future of this series. Like I said, we have Planet Zoo coming out soon. I do want to do a Planet Zoo series, probably. And I do want to try to finish this park up by that time. So it's going to be a pretty good challenge for me. Hopefully nothing random comes up to stop me from doing it, like this whole getting sick thing in the middle of summer. Getting a cold in summer was terrible. I do not recommend it. But yeah, we have a goal to work for here, and it's gonna be pretty challenging. I was looking a little bit around the park in a live stream, talking to people about what's going on. I think we have potentially a few more coasters, maybe 2, maybe 3 at the most in this park that I plan on doing at least. And then, like I said, I've been saying this for a while. I think once this park is done, we may not be done with this series. I think every now and then I might pop back into this park and maybe we'll tear something down and we'll renovate the park like actual theme parks do. I think that's something that could be kind of cool. And then when I'm bored, maybe, you know, when I don't have a lot to do or something, I really want to get back into Planet Coaster, maybe we'll do some little mini series here and there in Cedar Flags. I think that could be really cool. But yeah, that's just one of the goals. We don't have a lot of area left in this park, and that's one of those things I realized the other day, actually, when I came back in here. We're pretty close to the back of the park, and I had always wanted to do some sort of hotel resort back there. And so I think at some point we're definitely going to need to build that, and it's going to be pretty interesting. And I think it's going to be sooner rather than later in terms of the hotel build. I wasn't really planning on doing it sooner, but I think we're at the point where we pretty much need to figure out where that's going, because we are getting pretty cramped toward the back boundaries of this park. So that's one of those things that you guys can look forward to. But anyway, what are we doing right now? Well, we have all these planters, and at one point I had thought, you know what? We might need to get some fencing going here, because we obviously need to keep people away from the ride here. And since this is a suspended coaster, and since this is so close to the queue over here, I went ahead and I made this little area down here that is going to be fenced off. And I think this is one of the cooler parts of this park, or of this build rather, because this area allows the trains to get so close to the ground. And as you're sitting in line for this ride, you're going to see these trains whip through here, and it looks so cool. And it's one of those little areas over here, this planter that we have here, or I don't even know if I'd call it a planter. It's more of like a retaining box or something. This area is fairly thin. As you can see, the ride is there, and there's plenty of room to get around this area for the train, like safe room around it. But it just, as you're zipping through on the ride, it looks like it's almost too small, and you're like, ooh, how do I get through this? And it's you know, it's one of those illusions, I think, that a lot of roller coasters have, and it's just so cool. It's going to be really cool in the POV when we get some actual people down here, like in line walking around. It's going to be so awesome. I really am excited for this ride. I think this is definitely my favorite coaster in the park, at least, if not my favorite ride of all time in this park so far. So I just love the way that this ride like is just so incorporated into the landscape over here. It's so incorporated around the paths. It allows the guests to get so close to it. It's just such an awesome ride. And you're seeing those fencing, or that fencing, go up on these planters here. Like I said, we needed a way to, like, the planter itself is a good boundary, but I felt like you should probably get some sort of like taller thing to make sure people don't fall over these planters, because, you know, people are dumb. And as a corporate entity, or whatever you want to call Cedar Flags, we needed to protect ourselves a little bit, and we just ended up putting these fences up here. It was one of those things that, again, was very tedious. It could have easily been we didn't do this and no one would have complained about it, or no one probably would have noticed. But I think adding these in is just very important from a realism standpoint. And I think it adds to the area. It really locks people out of certain areas here. And we don't end up doing it around a lot of places, but we do end up doing it in very specific areas that we just really don't want people to be walking around. The next step over here, obviously, is to do the one thing that I've really come to love in this game, and I think that's going to transfer over to Planet Zoo eventually, and that is the landscape work. Just trying to get some of that nature thrown in here, and then trying to create this area underneath this track over here. So this is a very interesting place because we put the queue right under that giant cobra loop, or cobra roll, and it is just going straight through it. And then right on either edge, we had these really awkward areas that we needed to have the coaster be able to go through, but not like interfere with it at all. So ended up trying to get these planters to work over here. I thought maybe having like these artificial planters and then having all the nature work on top of that was going to work out. It ends up being okay, but in the end, I end up actually inverting this whole scheme over here. So eventually I'll end up flipping this around, and then we'll have the artificial planter underneath the track. Here we go. But yeah, it was going to allow for a very clean look under here, and it just looks more like it was supposed to be like this. And this is one of those things that you're seeing a lot of me like placing certain grid items down and then breaking them off the building and then turning them into their own little building just to try to hide certain angles here and there. It's just a very awkward build. There are probably a ton of different buildings technically around this area, but just because of all of that, it was weird because we had to try to get this coverage on a lot of this area. And the only way to do that was to turn things at little weird angles, and it works out, but it was kind of just cumbersome. There's, like I said, a lot of different buildings over here now, unfortunately, and it's just one of those things that once you start to like turn a piece and get it to clip into another piece, you get that Z fighting. So it was a lot of like turn something 45 degrees and then move it down ever so slightly just so it didn't clip through it. And yeah, it was just a very, very strange build for the most part. And then eventually I think I end up like cleaning up some of that stuff because as I was building it, I figured this was the easiest way to go. Like you saw those roof sections going over the queue path. Instead of trying to put the planters right up to the actual queue itself, I ended up covering the whole thing with a roof, and it looks fine, but it's one of those things that I just ended up trying to like cover the entire area, and then eventually I think I refined it a little bit because I didn't need so many pieces down there. But no, we had this little path that we had sketched out. We're connecting up all of the main pathwork now, and this was one of those things that like as I was building this area, it just kind of came about, and like I just tried to figure it out. So you just saw the connection over here to this, which is going to be another little plaza down here, but the one path that comes out of the ride over there is from the exit. It's going to be a really interesting way to get people to try to like move through this building. Like after they get off the ride, hopefully some of them come down this way. Hopefully some of them come out the other way that we have. And it's going to be kind of cool to see. But unfortunately, I haven't played the game enough to like have people down here, and obviously the ride isn't open just yet in the game. Maybe that's not obvious, but it's not open quite yet in my game. A lot of times when I'm building in this game, I have it on pause, and that is because the frame rate is getting pretty rough, and I desperately need a new computer. I just can't afford a new computer, unfortunately. But yeah, it's getting pretty rough, so I just try to build with the game in pause, and then for like cinematic shots, I'll turn it on and just basically set the camera still so there's not a lot of other stuff rendering in. But yeah, this is one of those areas that's going to be really awesome to see people walking around in. I'm very excited for that. But we're just trying to get these planters basically set up and done. I think no, actually, there's still a lot more planter to go. It's unfortunate. If you were playing a drinking game right now that every time I said planters, you'd have to take a drink, it would be a little unfortunate for you. So don't do that, or be very responsible. But no, there's a lot of little work to do, and a lot of this is very much just cookie cutter, or not cookie cutter per se, but tedious work that it's basically just trying to get stuff to line up there. And then getting all these fences to work. And then these planters are on a bit of a hill over here, so it's a little bit awkward to try to get this to work. Like, in one sense, we could just tilt these down and have them follow the slope down, but I thought that looked pretty weird because of the way they would clip into each other. So we end up doing this little, I think this is probably a little bit more realistic of how this might work, and that is to get a step type thing going down here with these fences. I think probably the real world solution would be to angle the tops but have the vertical thing still vertical to like the earth. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that to work over here. We just don't have that piece in this game, so it's a little unfortunate, but we end up getting that to look pretty decent. There's a few of those little fences that are not necessarily in line with the rest of them, but I guess we just won't mention that. We're back here now doing a little bit more custom support work. And like I said, I was just essentially trying to copy what was already in the game. We have most of the pieces that are in the self-generated supports, and we're just trying to basically emulate that. The only thing that I would say is that these top intersections where like an angled piece goes into the horizontal piece, we don't have a very smooth connection up there. So we try to cheat it a little bit and clip it into each other. It helps that our supports are colored black. So some of that clipping you don't even really notice. And actually, to be honest, like, there have been times where I'm like, is this support custom? Did I do this myself, or is this part of the actual like coaster? Do I need to move this myself? And then I like click on it and it's actually in game. So it's kind of hard for me to even tell what I've been doing and what is already there. But there were just some areas down here that were desperately needing supports, and I think I nailed all of them that I needed to. There were a couple very interesting little ones, like this one that we're doing right now is kind of like that A-frame support, just because we had the space and it was pretty low to the ground. The other one that we're working on currently is more of just a vertical support with another 45 coming off of it. I don't even think it's a 45, honestly, but it's just, we were trying to work around the queue back here, and it's one of those things that's kind of a challenge. And I would imagine that in like the real world of Planet, or yeah, in the real world Planet Coasters, no, in the real world, coaster designers would have to do this kind of stuff. I would assume they would think this all through as they were designing the coaster. I'm not necessarily sure how that is. If anybody knows that, let me know. Like, do the coaster designers also design like the queue for all of this stuff? Or is that up to the park and another construction team to kind of figure out? I'm not really even sure. But it definitely like plays into it. Like, I had to basically make these supports work within the confines of our queue. And I feel like maybe in the real world, you don't necessarily do that so much. You probably would end up adjusting the pathing systems that you're laying out more according to what the supports dictate. But in this game, we really don't have that luxury. And just because of what we wanted to do with the support, or with the queue path down here, we're really trying to just work around the path instead of the supports. So it's really one of those areas that was just it was a challenge, but it was actually kind of fun to do around this. Again, this is one of those areas that's just so unique and kind of interesting for the park so far, and it looks so good in the end over here. But you're seeing a lot more fencing over here. Like I said, I figured the queue down really low over here is kind of hazardous almost, because we have all of that area painted. I thought for the most part, any time the coaster would get really low, I think we figured that out, and we have it restricted for the most part. But I still think it's kind of awkward in a sense, just because I feel like, I don't know. I don't think anybody would necessarily hop over a railing, although saying that, I've seen people do that in real world parks anyway. So maybe this area is not as realistic as it maybe should be. I don't know. But I was trying to use some of this fencing over here just to try to keep people from hopping into the queue area at the very least. So this fencing goes around all over here, and I was just trying to make this kind of a restricted area. As you can see, we have the queue that's down low, and we also have the exit path or the main path over here on the same plane. So I feel like if you really wanted to like skip the line, you could almost try to jump that fence. But I tried to make a fence that was tall enough over there to make sense, to be like maybe a little bit more of a security measure for us. But anyway, this is, I think, the final part of the planter work that we have to do. Thankfully, this was, like I said, this was very, very tedious. We had a lot of stuff going on around here, but this is the last of it, and this is a very interesting little area. So that final, well, I guess it's not really the final, but this is one of the, toward the end of the ride, that big sweeping turn right before that corkscrew goes down pretty low, and I had originally intended for the pathing to be basically on the lowest level of the terrain with that curve, if that makes sense. But I ended up, you probably saw me raise up the terrain a little bit. So the path is now a little bit higher than the train as it goes through this area. So I think that's actually kind of cool. So as you're over here, you can kind of look, and it looks like the train is going below the terrain. That can get a little confusing, but it looks like it's going underneath the ground almost, not like under the ground, but down dipping into the ground, and it looks really cool. And it's one of those things that in the POV, it's a really cool little area over here. So it's this whole thing was pretty challenging for the most part, but it's so rewarding to see this come together like this. It's just such a nice little area all together over here. And I really hope that moving forward throughout the series, we kind of keep these same I guess, mentalities as we move forward throughout the park, you know, just trying to keep those paths kind of tight. I think originally we were kind of pushing things off the paths a little bit, but I think really if you want to get a really realistic feel to your park, you need to keep everything kind of pretty close. It's almost not necessarily on top of each other, but fairly tight to each other. I think that just really accelerates the mood for a theme park, and once you see all the action and it's right in your face, it just looks and it feels more fun. So I feel like moving forward we need to keep that in mind. And yeah, but this was another big challenge to tackle for this build, and that is this giant cobra roll over here. This thing is massive. I think it was the biggest we could make just from like a pre-built part in this game. So it actually was kind of interesting. The supports that it generated were awful. I really hated them. They were clipping through each other. It was just really ugly. I did not like it whatsoever. So we took all of those out, and of course we have to support this somehow. So this was by far the most challenging of the supports to try to figure out, just because of all these angles. And I eventually found this massive support structure, the big support beam. I don't think I knew that was there. I've been working with a lot of the large support beams that I thought were the largest, but they weren't. And fortunately, I clicked around and I actually saw that there was a bigger one. So this is actually a perfect size over here. So this ends up being pretty awesome. I think, at least from like a theoretical engineering perspective, I think it looks awesome. I feel like it would work as a support structure just because, I don't know, it looks powerful enough to hold this entire thing up. I feel like there'd be a lot of force going through this track, and I think the massive supports over here is just one of those things that looks like it would work. I don't know if anybody's an engineer and wants to take a guess at if this is sufficient to hold up the coaster, let me know. It was kind of weird. I looked up some of the like actual like real world coasters, inverted coasters and with cobra rolls, and I was trying to figure out how they did it, and a lot of times they have basically what the game gives us, just a lot more refined. But yeah, we didn't have the space over here. We're pretty confined, and having that queue path go right underneath this area was just one of those things that it confined it even more. So I think this giant support structure is just really cool, and I think this is one of those things that'd be really iconic for this ride. Just looking up at this ride and seeing this just massive support beam over here looks really cool. And as you saw, I was struggling to get this to work. It was one of those situations where like I tried to align the connecting pieces to the track, and then I tried to align the support pieces from the big beam over to the the attachment points, and it was one of those things that was kind of guess and check, kind of annoying. Tried to figure it out. Eventually we do figure it out, but it took many tries to do. And over here, what we're doing is just tying this together now. And this really adds to this. I really love it. I was thinking about potentially putting like a sign or something up on that, but I think I had looked at putting the billboards up there. I think it takes away from it. I think having like a giant screen or something up here just would not look cool. Maybe like a banner, like a mesh banner that you could kind of see through would look really cool, like in a real world sense, but we don't have those in the game. So yeah, I'm still not really sure what I want to do with the signage for this area. I am really not even sure what I want to call this ride yet. I mean, I've gotten a few really good suggestions that I've marked down, but this is one of those things where like I'm on the fence. Like I might want one thing, I might want another. I'm not really sure yet. But once I figure out what we're calling this, and once I figure out what I want the logo to be, it would be really awesome to get like an actual 3D sign put into this game somehow. And I know you can do it with the Theme Maker toolkit. I don't have the skills to. I am not a 3D modeler. I wish I were. If anybody is, let me know, and maybe we can try to work together to get something to work. I'd really love some actual custom 3D signs in this park. I think that's one thing that's very, very much lacking for this park so far, which is unfortunate. But then again, we didn't get the ability to put 3D signs in here until fairly recently in terms of the age of this game. So yeah, the last little support structure over here, maybe it might not be. Honestly, I don't remember. I recorded this so long ago, but this is another pretty crucial support structure over here, and that is this little chimney support that we have over here. So we have those 3 smokestacks. The one has the giant roll going right over it, and we needed some little way to support this just because it didn't look necessarily supported. So we're trying to subtly attach some supports over here, and I think this ends up looking pretty good. It's very subtle. It looks like it belongs, and it looks like it's actual structure. So it is really, really cool for this. And it's one of those things that it kind of it makes you think that, that chimney's not just some old brick piece of scenery that might crumble if you go on this ride. It makes it seem like this is safe to ride almost. I don't know if anybody's actually going out and like judging a roller coaster based on if it looks safe. I think by now we all know that roller coasters are fairly safe, unless you're at a carnival. I still don't ride rides at carnivals just because I don't trust anything that can be backed up into a truck in like 24 hours and taken somewhere else. But anyway, this is the last support structure, I believe. I'm pretty sure, I'm like 90% sure this is the last custom support area that we have to do over here. This got a little bit weird over here. As much as we worked the areas around the other side of the coaster, we didn't really have too much to do over in this area in terms of like terrain work and trying to incorporate stuff. I really didn't want anybody walking under this main drop or the first vertical loop, but this is a very nice area for some buildings and restrooms and that kind of stuff. So we have this little plaza down here now, which is pretty cool. We have a restroom that's going in, which is what we're building right now, and we're trying to kind of keep that same influence from the station building that we have, and it looks pretty good. And the one unfortunate thing that I realized about this restroom is that people on the ride right at the bottom of that dip are going to get a big old whiff of something nasty, and that's unfortunate, but it had to be done, I guess. Maybe we'll have some sort of high quality ventilation or something for our restrooms so that doesn't happen. But if not, you're going through the air so fast on that train that you probably would be like, oh, what was that? Oh, cool, a big roll that we're doing right now. So I don't even think you really realize it, but it was one of those things that I just kind of thought about as I built this. I was like, oh, it's probably not good. But we put some little ventilation pipes on the back of this building, and we try to lift it up almost over the track, so maybe in theory the smell wouldn't get too close to the track. Maybe it would fly over. I don't know how smells work. But yeah, I think I overthought that a little bit, but I think that's one of those things that you got to do in this game. Just have a little bit more fun and try to overthink some simple things like that every now and then. It makes this game way more enjoyable. But yeah, as you can see, the vents are going in now, and eventually we're going to need to build more for this little area. I don't believe in this time lapse we end up doing the building, because this is a little plaza and we are going to have a little food area down here. So I don't think we do it in this time lapse. I have done it, but I think I cut that into the next episode. So if you're keeping score at home, yes, I do have some stuff pre-recorded for the next episode. Hopefully there's not going to be a massive delay again, because, you know, I'm pretty much known for that at this point. I'm trying to get things worked out. Unfortunately, life is hard, man. It's just, I'm trying to get these out as much as I can for you guys. And this is just a hobby for me at this point. You know, I'm not full-time in YouTube. It's unfortunate, but, you know, maybe someday. But no, a little bit of terrain work back here. Like I said, I really wanted to not have guests back here, and I'm still kind of not sure. This is the one area that I haven't necessarily finished doing yet. So this is the last area that's going to have to be done before the POV video is going to be put together. And it's one of those areas that I think is just going to be strictly almost landscape work. I'm still not sure. I might want to do like another, I don't think ride right next to the lift hill, but maybe another like stall, maybe another stand for souvenirs. And again, we're thinking that this is going to be another entrance to the park, because we have that hotel that we're planning on putting back there. There's going to be another entrance to the park, so it's going to look like guests are staying at the hotel and coming in from the back side of the park. So we are going to need some like information boosts and stuff over there. Booths, not boosts. Information over there and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting, because this whole time we've been thinking about the front of the park as the front gate that we have, but eventually that's going to change. We're actually going to have two fronts of the park in a sense. So it's going to be a little interesting. We're going to need to build some more stuff out in that area, but that is not for this episode. We're finishing up this time lapse though with a lot of landscaping, and this is one of those things that, like I said, I've come to be known for almost, I think. But these are the little flowers that we're putting in here. I'm not a huge fan of this, but from a guest perspective, I thought it looked pretty good. So these orange tulips, I believe, are going in over here, and they look kind of sparse from above, and they look almost too patterned. But once you get down low and once you're on the ride and you're zipping through it, it doesn't look that bad. So it's one of those things that from above it looks kind of rough, but below it looks pretty good, and it just looks like a ton of flowers in there. And we ended up replacing all of those bushes that I mentioned early on in the time lapse. We ended up replacing all those with these tulips. So like I said, this whole boundary area kind of draws itself in, and you know that that area belongs to this coaster, which is kind of cool. I cut a lot of the flowers out of this time lapse, thankfully. Like I said, there was a lot of that, and that's something that you guys don't need to watch necessarily. And I also cut some of the boundary placement out of this time lapse because it was basically just doing the same thing that we did with the flowers and the planters, except with a different item. So you guys didn't really need to see that. Just know that they were all done, and we are not going to have guests walking through these planters, hopefully, and if we do, we have to fix it. But it's not one of those things that is going to be a problem moving forward here. The last little pieces that we're adding onto this area are just some landscaping here, a little bit of rocks. This was kind of a weird area because it's got that very awkward dip into the terrain, so I needed some way to make this look like it was supposed to be like that. So we're lining it with some rocks and some of these bushes. You guys know how I do already. But yeah, we're trying to incorporate some of the trees throughout the park as well. I think in this build, we actually introduced a new shrub that we've been using, or that we will, I guess, use over here. It's one of those weird things that, like, further on in the park, you can see, like, oh, I used that piece and those trees, and then I kind of branched out, if you will, pun intended, to these different trees, and now it's kind of like evolving. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of cool. I guess at some point we should go back and maybe tweak the foliage that we had originally in the park, because I think we've just advanced the taste so much throughout this park. But yeah, this is pretty much the end of the time lapse for the most part. Just putting some trees down here, getting this area to look pretty manicured almost in a sense, and at the same time making it look a little bit more natural. We're really incorporating nature around this park. I think that's one of our strong suits over here, but it just looks so good when this is done. And yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this time lapse, guys. I will go ahead and catch you over in the live portion. All right, guys, we are live here in Cedar Flags, and we are looking at all of the beauty that we just put down in this map. This was a lot of work, and as you could tell, the time lapse was fairly long there, and there was just so much tedious little work to do, but it was so worth it if you look at all this stuff. Oh, I love it. I did want to point out the end of the time lapse, you may have caught me recoloring these, and that was because originally they're like a brown, like a dirt almost, and I was thinking like maybe I could put some flowers down here or something, and I just really didn't like that. So fortunately we can go ahead and change the color of this, so I turned it into a gray to almost be like a gravel texture, which I think ends up being a pretty good gravel texture, so we may end up using that maybe in the future for something, but I'm not sure. But that was that. I did want to show you guys that real quick, but no, this is all... It was a lot of work. It has so much work to go too. It's pretty crazy. But like I was mentioning a little bit here and there, I love these planters and how they kind of draw this area, and you know this area all kind of belongs to this. So as you're walking down here, you see this orange ride, and you look down a little bit and you see, oh, these are orange flowers, and then they kind of almost guide you in. It's pretty cool over here. So I think over here we're not gonna have that, but yeah, you're just gonna see like, oh, naturally, you kind of want to go this way, and you're like, oh, this is where the ride is. Okay, cool. So yeah, that is pretty cool. And yeah, the one thing I did want to make a point to show you guys was all of this decorative trim that we have now around this area. So I lost a lot of this footage. Like I said, there was probably an hour and a half worth of footage that was just gone because my computer crashed. And yeah, unfortunate, but we did a lot of this, and I have a huge thank you to give to whoever had mentioned that this building needed a little bit of something, and they kind of nailed it too. It really did need a little bit of something, and it accents everything so well over here, and it does make it a little bit more fun. So as you're walking down here, it's not just like, oh, what is that factory making? It's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's an old factory, but it's got a roller coaster through it. So it looks pretty cool, especially from over here. You can kind of really see that detail work, and I love these little crowns that I found. I think this is just like an art piece that was like a crown or something, and yeah, it just adds to it. I think we're eventually going to put smoke in here maybe and have like little smokestacks out of it, just because we've been dealing with fire and smoke for the most part around here too, so why not keep that going? But yes, that is pretty much all that we did. I don't think there's anything else that I necessarily wanted to like make an emphasis on, but in the next episode we have this little bit to go, and it doesn't look like that big of a task, but it may be. I'm not really sure what to do over here just yet, so if you have any suggestions for anything over here, let me know. And yeah, we have a little bit more to do on this ride, and then we have the POV that needs to be done before we move on to the other parts of the park. So guys, if you like this one, go ahead and leave me a thumbs up. If you disliked it, thumbs down. I am on Twitter at DeekFTW, and I am also on Patreon, patreon.com/DeekFTW, and I will see you guys next time here in Cedar Flags.